one of my elders a long time ago from Wasáse, Ernest Benedict, really motivated me with a translation of my name and really a focus for my work in saying that was my role, to take our wisdom, to learn what I could from our own culture and our traditions and our own people, and to do it justice and bring those messages to the outside world. And that's what I've been trying to do, to honor that and to honor the struggle of our people by bringing the authentic voice of the Mohawk Nation, but not only Mohawk Nation, all Indigenous struggles into the spaces where they weren't welcome.
Kwe, Nindaluizi Pam Palmater, and I'm the host of this show, The Warrior Life. I'm a lawyer, professor, author, and activist from Eel River Bar First Nation, and my motto is education for action. Indigenous rights, social justice, and protecting the planet. On this podcast, you're going to get an education of a different kind. One that's enriched by the cultures, insights, and lived experiences of Indigenous activists, land defenders, water protectors, artists, lawyers, thought leaders, academics, leaders of all kind, effectively, who are on the front lines of resistance, resurgence, and revitalization. And today's podcast is all about the land, quite literally. So make sure you stay tuned. This is going to be a good one. Welcome back. I'm your host, Pam Palmater, and I am so happy to welcome to the show one of my good friends, one of my partners in crime, one of my comrades, one of my favorite people in the whole world, Dr. Taiaiake Alfred. Thank you so much for being here.
Sego, my friend.
I know you're busy with this huge book tour right now, and you know how I know? Because I was on one of those events to a sold out room. You could literally hear a pin drop when you were speaking. It's just so very exciting that this book has come out. And for anyone who doesn't know Dr. Alfred, he was on my show way back, like more than 4 years ago, talking about his work, because he's been leading the way on Indigenous sovereignty and resistance for decades, long before people were even talking about that. And if it were not for his writings, I don't know how I would have survived all of my university education, especially law school. Literally, Ty, and may he rest in peace, Danny Paul, who wrote We Were Not the Savages, they spoke brutal truth to power, and they countered that tired old narrative that you still hear sometimes today, and sometimes just outright lies about us. Dr. Alfred's an award-winning thought leader with a degree in history from Concordia, but also a doctorate in political science from Cornell University. And he founded the University of Victoria's Indigenous Governance Program, which I attended several times in his warrior camp, and Concordia's Native Student Center. He is the author of 4 books, one of which we'll talk about today in depth, but we're going to talk a little bit about all of them. And before we get into all of his amazing work, Ty, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit and the nation that you come from.
Sego, Skanago, Aguego, Taiaiake Yunjats, Kahnawake, Nijuwajeno, Kanyagahaga. Hello, everybody. My name is Taiaiake Alfred, and I'm Kahnawake Mohawk. For those of you that don't know Kahnawake, where it is, it's just outside Montreal. And I was born and raised there, and spent my adult life moving around and teaching in universities in Concordia, at Concordia University, University of Victoria. I'm now back working in my home community as of 2019. In the meantime, I've committed myself to Indigenous struggles and translating the wisdom of our people into a language that white people can understand and appreciate, and coming at them with the challenge of our continuing existence. And one of my elders a long time ago from Wasáse, Ernest Benedict, really motivated me with a translation of my name and really a focus for my work in saying that was my role, to take our wisdom, to learn what I could from our own culture and our traditions and our own people, and to do it justice and bring those messages to the outside world. And that's what I've been trying to do, to honor that, and to honor the struggle of our people by bringing the authentic voice of the Mohawk Nation, but not only Mohawk Nation, all Indigenous struggles into the spaces where they weren't welcome and where it makes people uncomfortable. So that's what I've been proud to be doing for the last 30 something years. In the meantime, I bounce back and forth, and I just have to say I'm a proud father of 3 sons from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and I'll leave it at that, and look forward to the conversation we have.
Wet'suwet'en Nation. Okay, so your kids have got literally the best 2 out of the 3 best. Wet'suwet'en, Mohawk. We're just missing Mi'kmaq in there somewhere. But I feel like you have enough Mi'kmaq comrades that it's all pushed together, and your sons probably get to learn from everything that you've done and all the cool Mi'kmaq people that you hang out with too.
Well, aside from our friendship and collaborations over the years, Kahnawake and the Mi'kmaq, the Mohawks and Mi'kmaq are always, we're tied together over history and culturally, and I don't want to say frenemies, but we've competed. We've competed in the past, and I've been reminded that there's Mohawk warrior graveyards outside some communities over there in Mi'kmaq. But I think that of all the nations and the relationships that we have, kinship-wise, sharing of wisdom and knowledge, most importantly, whenever one of us is in trouble and facing down a threat, our Mohawks go and support the Mi'kmaq, and the Mi'kmaq always come and support us. So I'm proud of our friendship, and I'm proud of the relationship that our people have.
Me too. Just don't drive around 6 Nations, for example, with a license plate that says Mi'kmaq. Just for anybody out there, just so you know, you're going to get tons of jokes and harassing. But I do love that about our nations, because during what happened, the siege in Oka, you had Mi'kmaq people from nations all over go there. When we were having troubles in Escanobridge, and even just recently, you had Mohawks come over, and also Wet'suwet'en. Like, there's like movement back and forth now. Like, we have a common enemy, so to speak. But before we get into the very exciting parts about your book, because I'm so excited to talk about your book, one of the things I love about this podcast is that everyone I talk to has something really cool, a really cool story or something really cool background. And you used to be a Marine. And I'm thinking, man, Mohawk Marine, that's amazing. What made you decide to go into the Marines, and do you think it's had any lasting impact on your life?
I've thought about that question so much over the course of my life, and I think there's a number of answers to that question about why, and they're all true, even though they're different. So one is just, when you're 17 years old, there's the whole psychological dynamic of wanting to leave, wanting to do something, wanting to strike out on your own. And I think that was a big part of it for me. There's also the impact of propaganda, G.I. Joe, all the war propaganda that exists in movies and comic books at the time and so forth, where it creates the idea, it's a romanticized idea of being in the military. And then there's just the tradition, and I think this is probably the biggest one. There's just a tradition among our nations, and I know it's the same for yours, but it's especially strong in Kahnawake, to join the United States military and to seek to prove oneself as a warrior. At that time, it was mostly men. Since then, it's become brothers and sisters who have gone and embraced that ideal and struck out on that path. It's kind of a combination of adventure and like seeking adventure and then challenging yourself at the same time. And so, I remember I was 17 years old. I wanted to get away from Kahnawake. I haven't grown up there and been there my whole life. And going down to the recruiting office in Plattsburgh, New York, and with my buddies, and I originally went to the Navy recruiter because my cousins have been in the Navy. But then on the way out, the Marine recruiter, and anybody who knows the Marine Corps knows they're quite aggressive, and they're quite bold. And he's like, "What the hell you want to join the Navy for? You know, what are you doing joining?" Kind of putting down the Navy. And he said it in more helpful terms than that, but I won't say it on your podcast here to keep it PG. Uh, but it struck me, and I was like, I gotta see this guy is crazy. I don't want to hear what he's saying, you know. And he got me. He got me hooked, and it kind of tapped into something that I had been feeling, you know. I tell people this, and I don't know whether it makes me crazy or what, but I used to have dreams about shooting and being in war and all those kind of situations, like dreams, like it was so real, like lucid dreams. And so for me, it was like, okay, I got to go do this. And uh, that's how it happened. I did the test, and I got a pretty good score, actually a really good score on the ASVAB, as it's called, like it's an intelligence test, and whatever you qualify for in terms of jobs. I said, the guy, when I went back, he's like, you could do, computers were just emerging at the time, you computerization, you could do avionics, you could do whatever you want to do. You want to be an intelligence officer, I'm an intelligence specialist. And I was like, no, I want to be in the infantry. And he's like, the hell's wrong with you? He goes, that's where we put the guys who failed the test. No, I said, I'll join in the Marines. I want to fire a machine gun. I want to blow stuff up, and I want to be on the ground. I want to be like on the battlefield kind of attitude, And he's like, well, okay, is that what you want? I'm warning you. He goes, it's not easy, but I'll sign you up. And anyway, that's what I did. And for me, like the lasting impact, it's still there every day. And anybody who's been in military service, but especially Marine Corps, that it shapes you. You're at such a young age. Like I joined when I was 17. I went to boot camp. As soon as I turned 18, I went to boot camp. And I'd gone from being kind of like a slightly overweight, lazy kid to going through this training and coming back lean and mean, and it's really shaped my own physicality and my own sense of discipline, organization, all these kind of basic traits that you have. And I think it served me well. I mean, there's certain things about it that you have to process once you get out and you want to leave behind. You don't always want to have a Marine attitude towards, for example, parenting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many, I've heard it from all three of my sons at various times, like, Dad, you were the Marine. I'm not a Marine. So, you have to figure that out. And there's that. And then there's just, the politicization that goes in, the kind of indoctrination, this kind of militaristic, very kind of gung-ho Americanism that I was fortunate, and kind of after I got out, I got immersed in the culture of our people and the history of our people and its movements that allowed me to think through that and leave it behind. And so it's the way I look at it, it's like keeping the good things. I'm still highly structured, highly disciplined, I think highly effective in pursuing a mission. And then I think I've also over years managed to shed the things that weigh you down, from being someone who continues on their journey in their life, and you're not held at that emotional level. It's a challenge for anyone who's been in the military, but it's doable, and it's something that I think that experience of the Marine Corps to me made me who I am, and so I can't go back and rethink it, out of my life. I have to just say that was part of my journey.
Well, and thank goodness that you came home and decided to put all of your Indigenous thoughts and ideas and manifestos together, because now literally we've got several decades of Indigenous peoples coming up in universities and actually having access to content that tells us to be proud of who we are, that this is about decolonization, it's about rejecting all of those things that, colonizer tried to put in our heads, and how do you identify those things and, really focus on our sovereignty? And so for me, when I was going to school and then going to law school and, doing my grad work and everything, I think the first one of your writings that ever impacted me was heeding the voices of our ancestors. Because at the time I was doing my doctorate, it was on Indigenous identity, and I wanted to get like a broad scope of what are all the different nations thinking. I was like, where's all the books from all of our Indigenous leaders? There was some out there, and thank goodness Danny Paul had his We Were Not the Savages, because oh my gosh, otherwise we would just think that we're horrible people if we didn't know the opposite was true. But heeding the voices was really about pride in our identity, being honest about the conflicts there are. It's about our rise. What inspired you to write this book?
Revenge. I wrote this book as my dissertation, and it was written in the midst of my own journey to learn more about the true history of our relations here, the true history of the land, more about our culture, about how we came to be in the situation that we're in, and the systems and the ideas that they use to keep us down and to get all our land. I had come to these questions myself in my own life. And then I had the opportunity after doing my bachelor's degree in history, which did not focus on Indigenous issues, by the way, which focused on something completely different. But as you alluded to, there wasn't really anybody that I could turn to in terms of mentors, professors, aside from maybe one or two people. There was Vine Deloria Jr., who I had encountered in terms of his books during high school. But other than that, it wasn't where you could go to university and learn and be influenced. And so you had to kind of think through these things yourself and be lucky enough to kind of encounter an author or be assigned a book or find a book in the library. There was no internet at the time. Find a book in the library that helped you think through these things. But when I got to grad school, when I started doing my master's and my PhD, I encountered the idea that natives were a thing of the past, like a remnant of history. I actually gave a talk at Cambridge University in England, and one of my friends told me afterwards, the person didn't have the guts to come up to me and say it to my face, but it was a senior professor at Cambridge, which is like the best university in the world, at the reception afterwards, and he told me that this guy said that, oh, I can't do the British accent properly. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
It's just like, brilliant talk. But it's a shame that those people are the remnants of history, the remnants of history. And this was much later than when I did my dissertation, but it still pointed to the challenge. So when I say revenge, I mean, here I was the first Native person to go to Cornell's government school in political science. I think I'm the first person to get a PhD in political science who's Native American. And so to go into that field and to encounter all these theories, these ideas, and not only in political science, but in anthropology and history and so forth, where the dominance of the white man was so hegemonic that it was almost impossible to bring any kind of truth or authenticity about us into that whole discourse. At best, what you could argue for was them tolerating or accommodating you, and you finding a place in their system and taking on a small role in the ideas and the structures that they had created. So for me, of course, being from Kahnawake and being a Mohawk, that's not good enough. And so I wanted to challenge and take on the whole structure. I wanted to dissect it, and I wanted to take it apart, and I wanted to show that actually the history of how the Indian Act and our communities came to be the way they were wasn't this kind of natural progression of civilization, which is utter bullshit, but it was a whole litany of crimes and lies and frauds and abuses that white people did to us that allowed them to take on this false mantle of superiority. And so for me, the first step in that was kind of dissecting the structure and the system and showing them in detail what happened and what didn't happen. So that's how this book came about. It was kind of like this vengeance motive, which kind of carried on and still carries on through my whole career. It was the first step in saying, okay, let me pull back the screen on this here. It's not Europeans are smarter. It's not Europeans have better ideas. It's Europeans are more devious. As we were reminded by Beatrice Medicine at the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, their ancestors were dirtier. And so they came here with diseases that caused us to fall down, and then they took advantage of that. That's the core message. And I wanted to show all the techniques and tactics they used in order to do that. But then also begin the process of understanding the impacts of all that upon us psychologically and culturally and so forth. And there's a bit of that in the first book, but it's a theme that kind of gets taken up later on as I progress in my own journey.
Well, I'm so thankful for that book because your revenge was my resistance. It was the thing I could hold on to when I was doing my doctorate on Native identity because, you know, how universities are, they want you to read all these theorists, liberal theorists, and like all these people who aren't Native and from all different backgrounds. And I just felt so bogged down with this. I don't know, this just doesn't speak to me. And thank goodness for your book because it was like one of those things where, okay, I have this, I can get through with the rest of my doctorate. You're just kind of struggling, and thank goodness that was there. And it didn't take long. When you think about it, it's like pretty almost 3 decades ago, that book, which makes us what, like 35, Ty? I'm thinking, we're just not that old for a book of yours to have been out for 30 years. But
I don't
now
feel
just
like it. I mean,
yeah.
literally, people say this all the time, but I can literally sit here and it's like it was yesterday when I took the photocopies and put them in an envelope and just wrote on it, Oxford University Press, and put it in the mail. That's how things were done back then. It's so different today, but just taking a chance, like here you go. Do you want to publish this? And it does not seem like that long ago, but it is a massive shift. There has been, a massive shift in the presence of Indigenous people, and it's kind of shifted what people's motivation are in doing these kind of things, what their motivations are. Like I said, for me, there was vengeance and it was driven by that. But also I had to walk the line of credibility, and I can remember so many times thinking, okay, this is kind of a hard message and I want to make it an even harder message for them. But it's so easy for them to dismiss because they're racist, but also they'll pick any kind of excuse to dismiss this. And so I can't give them that excuse. So I have an Ivy League PhD. It's Oxford University Press. I got reviewed in the Globe and Mail. The Canadian and American Political Science Association gave it thumbs up reviews, So any of these jablonis over here who have their degrees from some rinky-dink university, but happen to be an older white male, and usually stand on that, they can't come at me. They really can't come at me because even on their own terms, I beat them at their own game. And so you have to listen to what I have to say. You don't have to take it to heart, of course. You don't have to pay attention to it, but you can't dismiss it, and you can't keep it out of your discourse. So I was always very conscious of that, and I was playing on. Well, it's not playing really. It's like taking advantage of the credibility that comes from.
I've done the same thing, and it's like we have two worlds. We have to be credible and respectful and honor our ancestors to our own nations and communities, which is a big job whenever we do something. But in that other world, that academic world, you get all of the papers and the letters behind your name, and you get all the stuff that matters to them. and then you can deliver those messages, which is like, and then I mean, 4 years later, boom, out comes peace, power, and righteousness, and I'm like, "What?" Already he has an Indigenous manifesto, and for years, that was required reading in my classes, because it was just so powerful. Again, another really powerful book, different from the first one. So what inspired you to write this one?
The second one was really motivated by, I would say, if I had to go back and think of the different emotions and the kind of the psychology that I brought to it, it was frustration, really, because I had gone through the experience of working in, the band council system, these kind of imposed colonial systems operating within our communities. And I kind of stepped out of that and tried to learn as much as I could and get involved in Indigenous traditional systems, both in the Haudenosaunee context and also in British Columbia, in where I was living and working at the time. And because of my involvement family-wise. And the dominant emotion there is frustration, because I saw that where I thought that the solution was bringing back our traditional systems, the solution to colonialism was not just bringing back the systems, but really working through the psychological impacts of that multi-generational trauma of colonialism. So in fact, to put it bluntly, we had a lot of colonized people working within traditional systems, undermining the power and the ability of those traditional systems to liberate us from colonization. And I think that's what that book really reflects. And I didn't want to, and I wasn't capable at the time of really diagnosing the whole of our population, but I did have a hell of a lot of experience working with leaders, from the community level to the provincial level, federal level, even international level at that time. And I felt confident in being able to level some critique and some criticisms at the structure of Indigenous leadership in our country, but also even using individual paths and the actions and words of individual leaders to illustrate the points that I was bringing forward. And I felt that it was time to do that. Like, people, let's back up to the 90s there. We're still pushing as a collectivity against colonization, and people were very reluctant to criticize our own. Very reluctant. You were almost seen to be undermining the cause, to be criticizing leaders or to be bringing anything out. It's quite the opposite now. But at the time, to level criticism at a leader or your own, that was risky, and it was not something that people did. And so I think that this book took a chance on that, to open up that space for critique and self-critique by turning the lens on ourselves. So up until that point, diagnosing the evils of colonization and pointing to, like I said, how we were defrauded and our land was stolen and lied to and so forth, and the evils of the structure, but not much looking in the mirror. And I think that this book tried to get people to look at our own leaders and our own structures, for what needed to be addressed and what needed to be fixed. And so that level of frustration with being held back by this colonial legacy, basically the Pollyanna attitude that I might have had in the past, previous to that, looking at the revival of the longhouse or the revival of the hereditary system. That's all we need to do, and it's all going to be good. And finding out that even when you do that, we're still burdened by colonization. And so the positivity in the book is saying still that our systems and our philosophy and our ceremonies and our culture, basically, that is the answer, and it is good and it is strong, and we just need to invest and really live that out in order to be Ongwehongwe, a true human being or a native person. And we really need to make that our politics and get away from the compromised, trying to get along, moderate fitting in that decolonization had really put forward as a pathway up until that point. So that's what peace power was. It was using the condolence ceremony from the Haudenosaunee to diagnose the ills of Native leadership, if I had to put it in one sentence.
And it's so funny because I think at this point we, to call out the colonizers and say, here's everything that's happened, here's what continues to happen. It's a bit easier than being brave enough to say, okay, well, I've personally got to do some decolonizing, and so does our nation, and so do, like we've got to do this. And that's an equally hard message. So I feel like you were embracing hard the first book, and it's like even harder the second book. But when people read it, they were like, oh my gosh, he's been saying what I've been thinking, but I didn't want to say for a long time, or they're still in a position where they can't say it, but at least the book is out there saying, you know what, we should maybe think about some of this stuff, maybe make some changes. And so when Wasáse came out, and again, that was only like 5 or 6 years later, I was like, oh yes. So you've got the critique, you've got, the in looking inside, and now you've got the voices of warriors, which is kind of like you're ramping up, you're, diagnosing all these problems, and it's like, but here's here's the voices of the warriors who are going to inspire you to action. What inspired this book? Because to me, my favorite thing about it is hearing, like, literally the voices and the thoughts and the minds of the warriors themselves. You know how some people might like cite a reference, oh, page 6 of some book, and you're like, well, what were they about? In your book, you got to actually hear from them
Mm.
and know what they were about.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, man. That's I hadn't heard that before, but it means a lot. And yeah, thank you. The I think that what makes that book as an experience writing it different from writing other books was the fact that it really, really embodied the practice and the methodology that I have embraced, which is you have to live it. You go and you live it, and then you reflect on what you've learned, and then you try to bring that message to the people. And so all of those people that are profiled in the book, I know them. I had relationships with them. I learned from them. I engaged with them. We sat down and we had conversations and really opened up about these issues. And I think that that's what makes that book different, as you're saying. That it's not a researched book so much as it is a lived experience related, and then added to or supplemented with research. So the core of it are these relationships, and me trying to convey as a Ongoihoe the power and the vision, and really give respect to the struggle of these individuals as the core of what resistance is. So I didn't research resistance and then try to make these people fit into this theory. I talked to these people. I actually went to where they lived and experienced it, and gained my own knowledge from that. And then I used that, and then I brought in books and theories from other parts of the world and writers that elaborated on their ideas and that were consistent with their ideas. And so that book, I think, reflects what your remarks are, and that the core of it is this really authentic vision. And it's not necessarily mine. I was responsible in that book for translating the wisdom and conveying the experience. These people trusted me to do that, and that's what I sought to do with this book here. And the motivation in that was actually the conversations that I had coming out of Peace, Power, Righteousness. That book is it's impacted a lot of people. Like when you're writing them, you never know how it's going to be received, but it's sold over 10,000 copies over its lifetime. It's used all over, and every time I talk to people about it, they say exactly what you said. They're like, this book could be about my community. It's the same thing I'm thinking. and we have this conversation, which is all great. But then there's always the point at that, before I wrote Wasáse, there was always the point where they said, well, what do we do about it? So you pointed to a problem and you've kind of said in an idealistic way, like, this is what should be. Well, how do we do it?
Mm.
Why don't you tell us how? And that tell us how, I didn't really feel, even though I grew up in Kahnawake and I worked in politics and stuff, I didn't have the weight of experience to be able to tell anybody confidently, well, this is how you do it. I need to go and learn. And so even though I was in the middle age at the time and starting to be in middle age, and I was a full professor and I had been a negotiator and land claims and all this stuff, I still felt I had to go and talk to the real people
Mhm.
who were really laying it on the line in various ways, and had dedicated their life to these struggles. And that's what I did. And then I attempted to bring that forward. And I think that it's still a book that challenges, even though it was written quite a long time ago now. It still challenges people because our politics and a lot of the ways that our communities have changed haven't been consistent with this message of resistance. A lot of the ways our communities have changed and our movement has evolved is consistent with the idea of moderating it, of reconciling, of trying to come to some sort of cooperative stasis with the state. And that's not what this book Wasáse says. That's not what our warriors were saying. It was all about challenge. It was all about structural change. It was all about a radical critique. And so there are some people doing that in our on our political landscape today. But for the most part, that message of strong resistance is there, but it's not being heeded.
Mhm.
And so I think it's still a challenge for people to read that, and that's one of the reasons that I focused on this new book, is to kind of bring back that voice. Wasáse was written 20 years ago, you know, and I think it's still there. The message is still powerful, but people need a reminder. And so for me, that's what came out of Wasáse was two things. One, why haven't people embraced, or why aren't people acting on that strong radical message of that's authentic from our culture and our people? And two, what have we learned in the interim about what it is to decolonize? And that's maybe the answer to the first question about how deeply colonized we are, how the white society manipulates our own colonization individually and collectively to keep us at a moderate position. And so the new book really, I think, gets into these themes, because these are themes that I've explored since the publication of Wasáse, not through writing, but through speaking and through experience working in communities and just life experience. And so it's all a continuation, I think.
Yeah.
I used to say it was neatly like a trilogy: Heeding the Voice of Our Ancestors, Peace for Our Righteousness, and Wasáse. But now I blew that, so there's four now. So I don't know what the word is for four, but a set piece of four, we'll have to figure that out. But
Yeah.
it is a
Well, I love that how Wasáse really focused on the voices of our warriors, because you started out with, heed the voices of our ancestors, and then the critique that came, and then Wasáse is the voices of the warriors in the here and now. And what I love about your new book, of course, is that it's your voice and your journey throughout this whole time in all different contexts, talking about all different things, but a common theme. And you can see your own growth. Thought changes over time. I know this Twitter fighting society would like to have us pinned to every thought we've ever had from the time we were 5 years old, but we do change and our thoughts do expand. But you've never lost the core messages of, resisting, decolonizing, and revitalizing ourselves. So, what made you, after all of this time, um, write this book. And for anyone who can't actually see it right now, because we're not yet on YouTube, it's called It's All About the Land, the collected talks and interviews on Indigenous Resurgence by University of Toronto Press, released just like in 2023. And our dear friend, of course, Anne Rogers, she helped edit the book and she wrote the introduction to the book, which is really awesome. Like, she wrote a really powerful introduction. But one of the things I really love about this book is, you know how some people might have like one or two comments on the back of a book? You've got these major matriarchs and warrior women saying what they think about the book. And let me tell you, you listen to these women. Like, you've got Grand Chief Skydeer from the Mohawk Council on Kahnawake, and she was writing about this book saying it's how literally this reflects the laws, this reflects the hopes and aspirations of Native people, but in particular of the Mohawk people. And that's a really strong shout out, I guess, for the book, that you got it right, because we don't always get it right. And then you've got, oh my goodness, you've got Dr. Kim Tallbear, who is like everywhere. She is from the United States, so she's Native American, but she's working here in Canada now. And she's like, yeah, I'm reading this book and nodding my head the whole time. So, you got it right again when another powerful matriarch's like, yep, 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 yep. I mean, she could literally just say yes, and that would be the end of it. And of course, Mary TG, I just love her. She's like, yes, and she's got this like positive message about how awesome your book is and the messages in it. And of course, Sackhedge Ward, who is Mi'kmaq, he's like, yeah, this is it. You got this right. And there's many others who wrote praises for this book. And I have to say, one of my favorite parts is the foreword, because guess who wrote the foreword? It's Pam Palmater, and I had the honor of writing the foreword. And not just that. So this is like a big promo to buy this book anyway, but I have a chapter in the book too, which is just like, yay, it's like a double whammy. So I've come to following all of your work all of these years, collecting all of your books, reading all of your books, really thinking about everything that you've said to now I have the honor to write the foreword. It just blows my mind. So I have to say, disclosing all of my personal happiness and honor around this, thank you for allowing me to be part of this awesome collected works at a time when #land back is everywhere. And you and I both know land back is not a new call for justice. But in our modern age of hashtags, I can't think of a more important book right now when everyone's talking about land. Is this one of the reasons why you wrote it?
First of all, now I'll go for that introduction to the book and all the words. Again, means a lot. And especially pointing out the recommenders and the people that have come on board with the project and have supported me in doing this, starting with yourself and Anne, of course, who are my collaborators and who I'm extremely grateful for and having our relationship and being able to work together on this book, because it was, I just want people to know, it wasn't where, boom, I just asked Pam to write a foreword, sent it to her, and she sent it back. It was a real meeting of the minds and a collaboration on this and some of the core ideas. And I learned from that process, continuing to learn, and it was reflected in what I wrote afterwards in the series of reflections that I offered on the book. And Anne Rogers, basic answer to the first question you asked me about how did this book come about? It was because someone had been listening, someone was paying attention, someone had heard the message, and someone got really taken by the idea of Indigenous resurgence and the criticisms and critiques of colonial Canada that I had been putting forward, and that person was Anne Rogers. And this is a person that didn't really have any experience working with Indigenous people. She's not Indigenous herself. She's a Canadian, but had heard the message, and it resonated with her. And she basically brought the idea to me and said, you know, you're a person who people need to hear from again. You've been doing all these speeches, you've been speaking, you've been traveling around the world, but you haven't really published an academic or a scholarly book in a long time. Why don't you think about it? And so that's where the impetus for the book came in. And I think that kind of coincided too, time-wise, with the passage of time. Even though we don't feel like it, Pam, it does pass. And we do attain a certain age, and with that comes a certain status in the society. And people started asking me for my advice. And it wasn't where I was a student anymore, or it wasn't where I was a translator. I didn't feel like that to me. You know, people wanted my thoughts. And so I think that really convinced me that, okay, whereas previously I thought, oh man, that's hubris. That's so arrogant. I don't want to write a memoir, or I don't want to write a book that focuses on me. You know, there's all these great elders and teachers and leaders that we have to learn from. And I still believe there are, of all ages, young people and old. But now people were coming to me and asking me those questions and looking to me. And so I said, okay. And Anne and I put our minds together as to what would be the best form, what would be the best way to kind of revive that whole spirit of resistance and true Indigenous resurgence, in not an academic way, but in the culture, in the discourse in Canada. And so we decided right off the bat that it wasn't going to be an academic scholarly book per se. It was going to be a book that was informed by ideas. It was going to be an intelligent book for people who were thoughtful, but it was going to be written in a way that engaged people at the level of an educated person who cares about these issues. And so we wrote it that way. And the best material that we found were the speeches and the interviews and the engagements and the podcasts from 4 years ago that I had done, which were basically conversations where I got to lay out thinking on certain questions. And that's what forms the core of the book. And, you know, when I started circulating it, when the press started circulating it to different people, you never know how people are going to respond. And I don't know what people think of me. Like, I don't know, maybe my level of confidence, maybe give the misperception, create the misperception that I'm arrogant or anything like that. But I don't think I am. I'm always very, very wary of people's reactions, and I'm always craving people's, I'd say, approval, people I respect. And the people that you listed are the people that I respect. You know, and I've learned over the years that there's all kinds of voices out there at the cafe, on the internet, in academia. You don't have to pay attention to all of them because they're not all worthy of the critique that they're offering. But some of them are. And if you listen to those voices, you can learn a lot about yourself, and you become a better scholar, you become a better person, you become a better thinker, you become a better leader. And the people that you listed there are among the people that I have listened to and whose voices I respect. And to hear them react to the material that we presented in the way that they did, that was uplifting. And that was all the award that I needed. I don't know if the book's going to win anything or get, I think it was on one list only of 100, you know, the best books of 2023, yeah. The Hill Times, which is great. It means a lot because those are thinkers. But I've learned over the years that the reward for me is in the respect I get from people like that and yourself. It's a hard message. It's a critique of Canada. It's a critique of whiteness. It's not the kind of thing people like to hear. It's not the kind of thing people are comfortable hearing. And so, you know, to get on Canada Reads and all that, probably not in the cards for me. But for Kim Tallbear, for Mary TG, for yourself, for Gus, to say that this speaks to them and that it's something that they approve of and that they support, that's it for me. I'm good to go. And I really appreciate that.
Well, that's awesome. And we've done an event together and it was like this massive room. It was packed. You could literally hear a pin drop when you were speaking about the core messages in the book. And I went away and I thought, "Oh gosh, if I was to look at everything I've ever said publicly, like, think about you and I've done so many public speaking events. I mean, sometimes I just go back and look at my old YouTubes and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so cringy." But it's what I like about it is you didn't alter the content. So I have been, reviewing or looking at books or giving advice on books where people are doing somewhat similar things. Maybe it's their older writings, but they're like, "Oh my gosh, I need to change all of that. I need to change it." But you were honest enough to say, I might not have always said it the right way sometimes, but here's what I said. Here's my learning journey. And I went from this to this. And who knows, like in another 20 years, you could have another book and say, and here's all of my journeys in between. I like the honesty of it. Though when I thought about applying it to myself, I was like, hey, that's great. Ty's doing that. And it's just fantastic. And I can learn from him. I'm like, oh gosh, if I was to do that, oh, I don't know if I'd want to do that. Did you think about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, and thanks for saying that again. I did think about it for a minute. There's always the instinct. Everybody has these emotions when you're like, oh, damn, why did I say that? Or it's 2023 now. We don't talk that way anymore, or we don't do these things anymore. But then you just get real. Like it's. Do you want to be a real person, or do you want to be someone who's curating a brand? And that's the way I thought about it. And I'm just like, no, everybody used to talk that way. 500 people used to come to my talks to hear me talk that way. People used to come from all over the world to come to the program that I built and ran in order to get this experience. And so if people are critical of one aspect of that, or of the whole thing, or of me, that's fine. But I'm not going to go and erase or revise my life as if it's the first draft, and it needs to be updated for 2023. And I remember somebody, this was quite a while ago, but it happened right from the beginning. So I was at NASA. Those people that are academics will know, the Native American Indigenous Studies Association. When it first started, NASA in Minnesota, it was on a big panel, and there were some other Native luminary scholars on there. And then this one guy, a white guy, of course, sitting in the audience, trying to catch me on something, and he had Heeding the Voices of Our Ancestors open to a certain page, and he had highlighted a line, and then he read out the line and goes, "That's not entirely consistent with what you just said," or "I found some discrepancy between Heeding the Voice of Our Ancestors and your book, Peace, Power, Urge," blah, blah, blah. He's going on and on. And then I think I even interrupted him, because that's the way I was back then. And I was just like, hey. I said, "I got a question for you. Can you tell me what you ate for breakfast and the comment that you made to your wife on November 1st, 1991? And he's looking at me, and I'm like, "No, you can't," right? I'm like, "So do you want to own everything you've ever said? And can you recollect and defend everything you've ever said and stood by and stand by that today?" No, because some things you write, some things you say, some things you do, you either forget about it, or it's inconsequential, or it's inconsistent with things that you say and do now and positions you hold now. That's called being a human. That's called evolving. That's called learning. So if you're going to try to hold me to something I wrote, which was that date I mentioned, okay, fine, you got me. Oh, one sentence in one book I wrote is inconsistent with one sentence I wrote in another one. So you win. What do you want? Like, what's your point here? And I think that, I was a bit flippant and I was kind of coming at the guy as an individual. Of course, I was trying to, counter his arrogance with my own. But that's the attitude I take. It's like, if you're an honest person and if you're real, that's natural, is that you're going to have said and done things that are not the kind of things that you would say and do today. Simple. And anybody who says otherwise is fake. anyone who imagines that they've been entirely consistent their whole life with the way that they think and they believe now, and have never said or done anything that's inconsistent or insulting or has put someone off or something like that, I don't even want to talk to those people, because they're not real. They're not real people. And so I'd rather talk with the people who have lived, who have fallen down, who have gotten up, who have made mistakes, who have pissed people off, who have reconciled, and then now have learned from it and are stronger. Those are my kind of people. The other people who posture from high horses, they can have the internet.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're definitely not my people, because I actually I think of all of the things that have happened in my life. There, lots of good, but also lots of bad, trauma in my life, pain in my life. I'm sure the ways I spoke and the way I reacted at times probably was not very nice. I think about the things that I've said. Even now, I think, oh man, I want to rewrite Beyond Blood, my book, my very first book. Like, because even from my doctorate, which is decades ago, it's like, no, that's no. I want to go this way. I want to do it this way. I want to do it that way. So I get the same thing. I get people, putting on Twitter, no one should listen to you because on chapter whatever, there's this line and you said this. And I'm like, yeah, I did. And the difference between me and someone else is like what you're saying. It's to be honest. You put it in here. It's like, yeah, this is what I said. And the core message is always the same, but sometimes the way we deliver it or the words we use or like different things might not be the way we do things anymore. And it's like, I want to see people who've made mistakes, because that person speaks to my heart. That's the kind of person where I can say, okay, there's still a chance for me, because, oh man, I've made so many mistakes and it would be really hard to put yourself out there. And I think about youth who, if they only see the bright and shiny, they only see the native people who are perfect. And they're just shining stars and they are doing great work. I'm not taking them down. But if they think, oh gosh, well, that can't ever be me because, man, I've done some mistakes or I've done these terrible things or I've said these things or whatever in time, we don't leave it open for people to say, okay, I made mistakes and I accept responsibility for it. And I've changed because of it. I don't expect anyone to accept, my apology or whatever, but uh, here's who I am, or here's who I was up until now. And that's my journey and it's honest. I think if it was edited or glossed over, I probably wouldn't have done the forward, because you and I had all these really hard conversations around, okay, let's not sanitize this. Let's, it's like, here it is. Here's a journey. Take it or leave it, like it or don't. And yeah, maybe there's some inconsistent things in here or when something I said or who knows, but it's honest. And I really appreciate that. I also appreciate your afterward. So for people who don't know, and I'm not going to give it away, there's a really important afterword that Ty has written where he's reflecting on himself and reflecting on this journey. And I think that is equally as important as all of the content in your speeches. And I mean, I certainly don't want to speak for you, but how important was it for you to actually put an afterword in there?
I think it was, to me, I agree with you. I think it's an important part of the book. And it was very important for sure, for me to have something to say on those themes and on the issues and the self-reflective element. Some of the essays, well, I could call them essays, some of the chapters, sorry, because they're interviews, they're conversations, and their speeches, deal with the themes of self-reflection and deal with the themes of masculinity, deal with the themes of carrying colonial mentalities and everything that you've talked about in terms of the pride in being assertive, some of the missteps, maybe going too far, being a hard person, growing, to embrace vulnerability and sensitivity and not having that in the past because of upbringings and just generational shifts. and so I wanted to say something on that. And I wanted to, given that this book I know now is part of this progression, it's like it's a record of the progression of my thought and my career. I wanted to have something to say that people could refer to know where I'm at now on this. And so in conversations with yourself, I came to understand that better. It came into focus. And so I wanted to make sure that people understood how I have thought through the challenges of looking in the mirror, not collectively as a Ongwe, but individually as Taiaiake. Looking in the mirror and how have I thought through and where has that taken me? And so for me, that's what I wanted to do in the afterward. And then also, again, as we're doing here, to show respect to the people that have been influential in helping me do that. And so I do mention some names, some of which we've mentioned here, some of which people will read. And I think that's an important part of being honest. I think that people who, not to be too negative here, but like people who posture and people who create this image, whether it's online or through their art practice or academics or whatever, of being on that high horse, as I said, it's a way of gatekeeping and keeping younger people out and keeping younger people down, because everybody's human. Everybody knows they have faults. Everybody knows that they don't live up entirely to the ideals. And if you set yourself up as this person who's living out the ideal and there's no chinks in your armor, these younger people are never feel like they could achieve what you've achieved. And I think that happens all too often. And so for me to kind of break that down, not to call out every individual who's on a high horse, but to use myself and say, here's the reality. You can have an impact. You can be a person involved in resistance. You can move people. You can impact people. But you're also going to live your life, and you're also having to think through that. And you don't have to be this idealized notion that anybody has about a human or a man or a Ongwe in order to do good things and to step into that space of power. And so for me, I wanted to open that up and say, okay, here, look, I used to only really pay attention, although I craved the attention and the approbation and the accountability of older women in the community. It seems like almost all my sources and the people that I held up were all men. It wasn't like that in my mind as I was doing it, but looking back, I'm like, yeah, it was the 1980s and 90s, okay, early 2000s, and lots of people did that. But I learned that I need to do more than that. I need to push myself beyond that. And I also need to look at other literatures and other writers and other thinkers. And I need to expand my universe, expand my mentality. And so by talking to these people and listening to their critiques, that's what I got. And so I wanted to acknowledge that too. So you can learn even from people who are critical of you. You don't need to shut out criticism. You don't need to demonize. You don't need to gossip and criticize people who are criticizing you and say that their critique's worthless. In fact, if someone's criticizing you, you should be listening extra hard.
Yeah.
Even if they are motivated by motivations that are not positive.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying something and you should listen. And if it actually connects, you're learning from them, whatever their motivations are. And that's what I wanted to say in that. And I wanted to show that, not just say it, but show it. And it's part of that whole deepening understanding on my part over the years to where I am now, 59, that all those voices are important to listen to. And so to me, that was a big learning moment. Is it's not a battle
Yeah.
in the classic sense. Like maybe when I was in my 40s and so forth, I would be like, okay, yeah, we're all struggling to be the voice, you know. And if you're right, if you're on side with my political message, I'm going to amplify you. If you're not on side with my political message, I'm going to ignore you, and I don't need to pay attention. This and that. And I think that's the way most people are in the academic environment. But I was like, if you're a true Ongwehongwe leader, that's not the way you're supposed to be. Yeah, you're supposed to listen to everybody and consider all of these ideas for their true weight, and then develop your mind and the message as it goes forward. And so, to me, that's what I wanted to show. That yeah, that's what I've learned, and that's what I do now. And so it's really translated into a stronger, I'd say, capacity for leadership, because the work that I'm doing now in my own community is pretty challenging. A lot of people are like, why would you go and take a job where you're in between the band council and the longhouses? And why would you put yourself in that position and try to say to both of them, I'm going to listen to you and this is where we should be moving? That's what I took on. And I think that I would not have been able to do this work successfully without having gone through that and come to that crucial learning, which is that not everybody who's critical of either a system, an idea, or you personally is someone to be ignored. Some of them are. Some of them just don't make any sense, and you have to listen to them. But you have to really respect people fully. You have to respect. And that's different than the idea that I had, and I think a lot of us had in academia in the past, and not only academia, but in our political movement too. And I think it's still a problem.
Yeah, I agree. It's such an important message too, because it's one of those ones I use the example, the band member who comes to every band meeting is really angry and demanding information and asking questions. That's a person who cares. They're showing up at every meeting. They're asking questions. They're worried about their future, the future of their families. They want to make sure things are going on. How people express themselves is a product of our history, our lived traumas, like all of our experiences. So I try not to look at how someone is expressing themselves, short of like threats or something, but it's not the how they're expressing themselves or the emotion that they have when they're expressing themselves. It's have you asked me a really important question, something I didn't answer, or something I didn't clarify or put context to, or maybe I said something and it could be hurtful. Some people say, Pam, you should be deleting all the negative comments on some of your social media. And I'm like, I will delete things that are threatening, horribly racist. They never come from our people, but all of the nasty, hurtful things that would hurt people that follow my content. But if it's someone who's like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, that Supreme Court of Canada case, they're just going to use a notwithstanding clause, and you're leading us down a improper path. Well, clearly, I didn't address the notwithstanding clause, so I'm going to do a live show and bring on native lawyers and say, what about this? Because now I have learned something because of that person's critique. And maybe they were just nervous. Maybe they were anxious about the future, or they don't want to get their hopes up. So that the listening part, I think, is important. And I love that you did that. I love that in this book, it's all about the land. Ultimately, the messages, there's like personal development, personal growth, self-critique, critique of the colonizers, but ultimately it all comes down to the land and our sovereignty and our ancestors and what it means to be Mi'kmaq or Haudenosaunee or Wet'suwet'en. And very, very, very inspiring. I encourage everyone to buy it. I will post links about where you can get It's All About the Land and any of his other books, though I think Heeding the Voices of Our Ancestors is going to be like one of those rare commodities where you might have to go to a used bookstore or you might have to buy it from Tai directly because it is few and far between at this point. So if you get it, consider you got yourself a gem. So thank you, Tai, for taking the time to do this. I know we even went over, but we had to catch up first. And I really appreciate it. All the work you do, putting yourself out there. It's very nerve-wracking. Anyone in the public eye, knows that your greatest fear is to wake up in the morning and, oh no, there's all these people who are mad at me for something that I've done. I think as humans, we crave approval. Did I do it right? Did I do it respectfully? Am I helping in some way? And I guess that's all we can do. But I thank you so much for being here and allowing me to be part of the book.
Yeah, my friend, it's great to be on the warpath with you, and I look forward to many years of collaboration and friendship.
Yes, it's going to be awesome. And to all the listeners on the podcast or the viewers on YouTube or the people who are reading the closed captions, thank you for supporting the Warrior Life podcast. Thank you for supporting all of the Indigenous peoples that come on this podcast. There's a ton of ways in which you can support them. Find ways to support them and share this far and wide. And there's free things to do to support this podcast. You can like it, you can share it, you can leave great comments, you can leave 5-star reviews, use it in your classrooms. There's so many ways that we can help one another. And I appreciate all of you for staying with the Warrior Life podcast. Till next time, keep living a warrior life. Walalia.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting my podcast. Your donations help me keep the Warrior Life podcast open access to everyone and free from those annoying ads. And it's super simple. Just click on the link below to sign up for a Patreon monthly or yearly subscription, or click the links for the Buy Me a Coffee app or the Ko-fi app to make one-time contributions. And if you belong to an awesome community group, business, or organization that's committed to Indigenous reconciliation, consider sponsoring an episode or two, or as many as you like. Thank you for helping me lift the voices of Indigenous warriors doing phenomenal things to help make our world a better place.